Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully, everyone is doing a-okay. Um, Everyone's staying safe and all that kind of good stuff. Well, this past week we've learned what the actual AP exam is going to look like. If you haven't seen my message or you didn't go to my website, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing it? You should do it like every day. Make it your homepage. Just saying. Anyway, the test is now going to be on May 13th, which is a Wednesday. It's only a week later than originally, but that gives us an extra week to basically do extra review. Also, if you haven't heard, it's going to be only a DBQ. Now it's 45 minutes, so you're going to have to write a DBQ pretty quickly. With the DBQ, it is going to be 5 documents instead of 7. And probably they said the rubric is going to change a little bit. We'll see what it actually looks like. But so because of that, then as we cover all the material or review all the material again, I'm going to be assigning some extra DBQ practice. Not writing full DBQs, but at least practice like hippos and contextualization and all that kind of good stuff to ensure that you could get every single point. Remember, the more points you get, the more the likelihood you're going to get a 5. So that's my goal because you guys worked hard, and I don't want this whole stupid virus um, to rob you guys of getting that 5 that you deserve. Okay. Well, today we're going to start our Unit 3, Absolutism and Governments that are coming out of the Renaissance. Enjoy. When we look at absolutism, we have 2 kinds of absolutism: Eastern European absolutism and Western European absolutism. We're really going to focus on Western European absolutism, but with Eastern European absolutism, um, governments will not change much from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance. In Eastern Europe, you're going to have a very strong king, no real legislative branch, and then you have some powerful nobility, a weak middle class, and pretty much everyone else is considered a serf or a slave. Whereas in the Western European absolutism, like in France and England and HRE and Austria and such, you're going to have a powerful king, but in most cases, you're going to also have a legislative branch. Now, every country is different, but every country is going to have a weird relationship between the monarchy, the absolute monarchy, and the legislative branch. Some will work well with each other. Some, the king's going to be more powerful than the legislative branch, or vice versa. And in one particular instance, one king's just going to eliminate their legislative branch from power. So let's start talking about England. Let's do a little background first. Last we left England, Elizabeth was the ruler. Okay, she ruled during a long period. It's called the Golden Age. It's called the Golden Age because she ruled really at the start of the Commercial Revolution. And the Commercial Revolution is going to cause many changes during her reign and the later reign when she dies of the Stuarts. Now, it's going to create large amounts of social changes. For example, you're going to have a growing middle class that's growing exponentially because of industry, because of trade, and all that kind of good stuff. You're also going to have the gentry growing quite large as well. Okay, gentry are your land-owning elites. Okay, that are the ones that are producing or growing commercial agriculture. You also have the Puritans are growing in England. The Puritans are basically your Calvinists, but in England they're called Puritans. They are the largest. They have the largest growth percentage in England, meaning they're starting to grow exponentially. They're starting to grow quite largely, more so than any other group. And they're going to cause some trouble because they want a change in the Church of England. They want to eliminate anything that resembles the Catholic Church in the Church of England. So they're going to cause some trouble. Now, when Elizabeth dies, her, the next in line is her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots. Unfortunately, she had Mary Queen of Scots killed off during her reign. So the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who's the current king of Scotland, James VI, is going to be the king of England when Elizabeth dies. The problem is England and Scotland have been going to war with each other for a while now. They do not like each other. But with the rise of James VI, or King James VI of Scotland, becoming James I of England, we're going to have the first time England and Scotland is going to be unified. But there's a lot of problems with that because Scotland is mainly Presbyterian, which is a Calvinist religion. Okay, he's now going to be the head of the Church of England, which is not Calvinist. Okay, it's Anglican. So that's going to cause some trouble. But when he comes to power of England and Scotland, he doesn't understand the complexity of the English government. In Scotland, he ruled as a divine right king, that basically his power comes from God, and he has sole authority to rule. He didn't rule with a parliament in Scotland. Well, now he's going to have to. Okay, James I, unfortunately, has a lot of problems with the English parliament when he's ruling. Okay, because he feels he should have all the power, but Parliament says, whoa, 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 look at the Magna Carta, look at our tradition. We make the laws, you enforce the laws. So there's going to be trouble between the two branches. James is going to rule for 22 years, and he's going to have lots of issues. Okay, one, not just trying to gain power, but Parliament did not like James I at all. They criticized his sexuality. They criticized a lot of aspects of him, but they let him rule, and he let Parliament do their thing. It was a kind of a love-hate relationship between the two. Now, the one major thing that James does is creates a unified Bible that could be used for all religions within England, and that's the King James Bible. That's now the most widely used Bible in the world. Okay, so when he dies in 1625, his son comes to power, and that's Charles I. Now, James I was, he learned to rule with Parliament. Charles I, though, kind of did not learn from his father's mistakes. He wanted to try to be an absolute ruler in a country that never had absolute rulers. Okay, so Charles I is going to try to rule mainly without Parliament, but that doesn't work. He's always constantly fighting with Parliament. He dissolves Parliament a couple times, but every time he dissolves it, soon after he has to open it up because he needs money to fight wars against France, Spain, rebellions in Scotland and Ireland, you name it. So the Parliament of England forces Charles I to sign what they call the Petition of Rights in 1628. And it basically says taxes can only be done on the consent of Parliament, due process in front of the law, okay, and that people have certain rights that the king can never take away. Well, unfortunately, he pretty much disregards this, even though he signs it, and this just continues the battle between the two groups. Now, Charles I was pretty much an open Catholic. He did not hide that he was Catholic. He was not Presbyterian, even though his father, by word, I guess, his father was pretty much said he was a Presbyterian, but in private he practiced as a Catholic. Charles I was an open Catholic, and that bothered some. And he wanted the Anglican Church to be more Catholic instead of and try to eliminate the Protestant parts of it. So, Charles I was not a very popular man, and what really made him even less popular is that he is going to issue an order that the Book of Common Prayer is going to be used in all churches, not just Anglican, but also Catholic and Puritan and all the other religions that were found in Great Britain. And of course, that's going to anger people, especially the Presbyterians in Scotland. Okay, so the Scottish people are going to rebel. And when they rebelled, they're actually able to defeat Charles's forces. Okay, Now, being that Parliament has already been dissolved, now Charles is forced to call Parliament back in session. It's going to be called the Long Parliament, and he needed this money. Uh, when you lose, you have to pay reparations, and the Scots basically ordered him to pay reparations, or they're going to go into England and take over parts of England. Okay, and especially the problem is that up in the north, you have large amounts of people that supported the king. So if the Scottish were to come into northern England, well, that would affect a lot of the king's supporters. So that's a big no-no. So the king basically has to say, okay, I'm going to open up Parliament, and basically Parliament says, okay, you cannot dissolve us anymore. You're going to be forced to work with us. Okay, we're going to get rid of William Laud, L-A-U-D, who is the leader of this whole Make Everyone Catholic Again movement by Charles I, William Laud, L-A-U-D. Okay, they actually execute him, and they force the king to work with Parliament. But things are not going to work out. They really try to pass a number of bills to really limit the king's power, and eventually the king tries to arrest some of the leaders of Parliament. And when this happens, you have what's called the English Civil War starting. Now, do not get bogged down on all the different details about the English Civil War. Just focus on what caused it and what are some of the effects of the Civil War, especially when it comes to the king and Parliament's relationship. Okay, because that's going to really dictate how England is going to be for the rest of history. Now, when the English Civil War occurs, you have two sides. Everyone joins a side. You're either on the monarchy side or the Parliament side. The monarchy side is basically your Cavaliers. These are your upper class people that support the king, your aristocracy who's always had power, the rich, the Anglicans, the northern people from northern England and Wales. Okay, these are all your Cavaliers. On the other side of this war are the Roundheads. These are people that are supported by Parliament. They are led by Oliver Cromwell. Now, these are your Puritans, your poor people, your merchants, your middle class, your small farmers, your big cityers, and your southern people from southern England. Okay, so you have the war, and by the end of this war, basically the Roundheads are going to win, led by Oliver Cromwell and his new model army. Now, but what is really going to cause the English Civil War? That's important. Okay, you had the monarchy that basically wanted the right to be able to tax people. Okay, tax more people because, or raise taxes because England was such in debt. Parliament was trying to kind of limit the monarch's power when it comes to taxation, foreign policies, religious policies, etc. And the Puritans were like, whoa, 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 leave our church alone, leave our religion alone. They didn't like the Catholic tendencies the king and his family were pushing. Okay, so basically, at the outcome of the Civil War, okay, Cromwell is going to win. He's going to really create like a military force that's going to be strong. He's going to execute Charles. He tries to rule Great Britain as a republic. The problem is it's never been a republic. It's always been a monarchy, and that's going to be a problem. And when at first he tries to work with Parliament, the Parliament that he created, basically, he got rid of anybody that was against him from Parliament. So you have what's called the Rump Parliament. But even then, he didn't like sharing power. So this revolution, which was to get rid of an absolute ruler, now creates an absolute ruler under Oliver Cromwell once he gets rid of his Parliament. And now in 1653, he becomes the Lord Protector, where he pretty much outlaws anything that's Catholic. And just like the Calvinists, he's going to enforce a strict moral code on everyone, not just the Puritans. Okay, no singing, no dancing, no bars, no brothels, no music halls, dance halls, you name it. Okay, he does tolerate Jews and other religions as long as it's not Catholic. So the Irish Catholic are going to really hate this, and they're going to start rebelling and causing problems in Ireland. Okay, and that's going to be a problem that Cromwell is going to deal with. But at this point, once the Civil War happened, we got rid of a guy who tried to be an absolute ruler, and now under Cromwell, it becomes an absolute ruler, or he becomes an absolute ruler as well. Right before Cromwell died, he made a law stating that his son is going to rule Great Britain once he dies. And a lot of people were like, wait a second, that's a monarchy, and an absolute monarchy at that. And so you're going to have the leaders of the former parliament organize a rebellion once Cromwell dies. And they do. And they basically are able to push Cromwell's son out of power and restore the Stuarts to the monarchy and restore the monarchy, as well. And this is going to be one of the biggest lessons that we know of the English Civil War, that England cannot survive without a parliament and a king, and vice versa. You have to have both a parliament and a king. Okay, so when Charles II comes to power after with the restoration of the Stuarts, he is the son of Charles I. He learned from his father's mistakes, and he got rid of all the Puritan laws that Cromwell had instituted. He restored England back to the way it was. He allowed people to practice freely in their own private lives. He also allowed political parties to form in Parliament. And you have two political parties that are going to be formed, and that's the Tories and the Whigs. The Whigs are your Liberal Party, and the Tories are your more conservative party. The Tories are basically, actually, they're still around to this day, and they're supporters of the upper class and the king. Okay. Unfortunately for Charles II, he doesn't live that long. He's an older man by this point, but he is considered a politique because he tries to stabilize England after the rough Cromwell years. And he does, though. He does a great job, but unfortunately in 1685 he does die. And since he has no heir to the throne, his brother comes to the throne, and that's James II. James II was a full-blown open Catholic in a Protestant country. He basically wanted to make Great Britain Catholic again, and everyone hated him for that. He made laws that were pro-Catholic, allowed Catholics in government, you name it. But he was old and decrepit by this point. And so everyone's like, okay, he's going to die soon. But what they forgot, well, actually, they thought he was going to die soon. And since he had no male heirs, he had two female daughters, both of which were married to strong Protestant men. Okay, his daughter Mary was actually married to William of Orange, the strongest Protestant in all of Europe. So everyone's like, okay, this old decrepit dude is going to die soon. Let him just do his thing, and then he'll die. But they forgot that he was married to a very, 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 very young woman, and she gets pregnant, and she has a boy. And so what's going to happen is Parliament is going to go to the Netherlands and convince Mary to overthrow her father. Okay, and this event is going to be called the Glorious Revolution. Mary is going to get her husband, William of Orange, to raise an army and sail across the English Channel. When that happens, James II realizes his days are numbered. He abdicates the throne, leaves England, and William and Mary will be a dual monarchy in England, the first dual monarchy in history for England. When that occurs, the first thing they do is create the English Bill of Rights that basically states the rights of people, what the monarchy can do, what they cannot do, what the king can do, what the king cannot do. It rejects all ideas of the divine right of kings. It says that monarchs must always be Protestant, never could be Catholic. That's still in effect to this day. It created rightful lines of succession. So this idea of, okay, the king decides who's going to be next in line is thrown out the window. It protects it eliminates the abusive powers of kings, and it protects individual rights. This document is going to create a constitutional monarchy in England because it limits the power of the monarchy and pretty much gives more power to the Parliament. And that stays in effect all the way through to modern times, to more modern times. Now they have changed where pretty much they eliminated all the power from the king or the monarchy, and they given it to parliament and the prime minister. That's down the road. Okay. This is called a glorious revolution, a bloodless revolution. Very important, very important, very important. Make sure you understand it. Now let's move over to France. Every time we think of French absolutism, the person that comes to mind is the man, the myth, the legend, one of my heroes, Louis XIV. Now, he's not really my hero, but yeah. But anyway, everyone thinks of him, but actually absolutism in France starts way before Louis XIV. It actually starts when Henry IV, the first Bourbon king, comes to the throne after the French Wars of Religion. He actually starts absolutism in France. He was a politique. We know about that. We know about the Edict of Nantes. But he's the one that starts the foundation of absolutism. When he gets killed by a crazy Catholic, Louis XIII comes to power, and Louis XIII, with his advisor, Cardinal Richelieu, really even grows absolutism even more by usurping power away from the nobility. Okay, he was really the man in charge of France, because Louis XIII was not the best ruler, but Cardinal Richelieu is going to really usurp the power of the nobility by creating the intendant system, the eyes and ears of the king, so that no one could ever go against the king. Okay, the intendants were from the middle class, so this caused a massive friction between middle class and upper class, because you didn't necessarily know who were the intendants. Okay, now Louis XIII, with Cardinal Richelieu, they're going to really make France a very powerful country because of this whole idea of the 30 Years' War, winning the 30 Years' War. You got to remember, when Louis XIII comes to power, he's only 9 years old. Okay, he's only 9 years old. So basically, for the first 2 decades of Louis's reign, Cardinal Richelieu is the man. Okay, he gets France involved in the 30 Years' War, not as a religious war, but more political, trying to defeat the Habsburgs and take away all their power, or as much power as possible. Cardinal Richelieu is another politique, because he does what's best for his country, not for his power, even though his power is immense. Unfortunately for Louis XIII and Richelieu, they both died the same year. Okay, right in the middle of the 30 Years' War. Okay, and when he comes to power, or when they die, excuse me, Louis XIV comes to power at the ripe old age of 5. Okay, now Cardinal Mazarin is going to be his advisor, obviously, because a 5-year-old cannot rule. 5-year-olds, can they even poop on their own? I don't know. Anyway, without diapers, sorry, stream of conscious. Anyway, so what's going to happen though? The nobles, after all these years of basically having their power taken away, and now that they have a 5-year-old king, they're like, ha ha ha, we're going to take some power back, and they try, and it's going to be called the Fronde Revolt. Okay, the Fronde basically want power back. They want elimination of the intendant system, and they want the nobles to have more say in government. Okay, well, the Fronde, they're going to get a little bit of power back, but not as much as you think. Okay, Louis XIV, Cardinal Mazarin will give them some power, but in reality, it's going to be more deadly than anything else for them, because people are going to realize, wow, the nobility are only after one thing, and that's their money, their power. They're not after a stabilized government. Okay, that after all those years of French Wars of Religion, from Henry IV all the way through to Louis XIV, there was a lot of peace within the borders of France, and everyone kind of liked that, because without peace, you can't have economic prosperity. So when this Fronde revolt occurs, people are like, wow, these people are only after themselves, and that they're going to become very unpopular. And of course, Louis XIV is always going to remember this, especially later on when he's an adult. So under Louis XIV, we all really know a lot about Louis, so maybe I could go through this a little bit quicker. If you remember, Louis XIV had one advisor by the name of Bishop Bossuet. He had many advisors, but one of his advisors was a guy by the name of Bishop Bossuet, who created this idea of divine right of kings. Okay, and he said that the kings are not responsible, or they don't have to answer to the people. That's crazy. God chose them to be the ruler of their country. So the ruler of that country only answers to God. So they have absolute power under God's laws. As long as they're good Christians, they'll do fine. If they follow God's laws, they'll be fine. Which is why, he doesn't rule with the Estates General. Okay, the Estates General hasn't been called since 1614. Okay, and he doesn't rule with anybody. He makes all the decisions now that he's an adult. He actually, when Cardinal Mazarin dies, he doesn't even take an advisor. Okay, a close advisor like Mazarin or Cardinal Richelieu were. Okay, he proclaims himself that he is the Sun King. That without the sun, you don't have life, and without him, France cannot survive. So he calls himself the Sun King, where everything revolves around him. He says that I am the state, and in history, he's going to be the most powerful ruler ever. When you look at all throughout history, he's the most powerful ruler ever. Now, under Louis XIV, this is going to be basically the golden age of absolutism. He reduces the nobles' power immensely. He increases the intendants. Okay, he forces the nobles to live at Versailles. He forces the nobles to have common jobs and to partake in whatever whims that he wants. He pretty much says, hey, nobles, you like your power, you like your title, you like your wealth. Well, if you're not on my side, you'll lose all of that. So he pretty much has them like stuck in a corner. Okay, so they have to basically align themselves with Louis. Okay, but during this time period, France is economically strong under Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Okay, the finance minister for Louis XIV, he does improve the economy. He puts high manufacturing goals and restrictions and such on everything that's produced in France. He wants everyone to buy French, and he wants everyone to see French products as not just common day products, but elite products. The finest laces, the finest furniture, the finest clothing. So basically, he wants everything to be high end. Okay, because if it's high end, you could pay, you could charge a lot more than it was just common day stuff. Okay, so he forces everyone to follow these strict manufacturing laws. He creates the American colonies and forces them to just not. He doesn't send people to the French colonies in America. He actually says if you go to France, if you go to America, the French colonies in America, you're going to be there for working, for merchants and trading. You're not going to be there to live. Whereas English colonies were all about people live there just to get out of England. No, it's opposite in France. That's why the Louisiana territory was so sparsely populated. Okay, but Jean-Baptiste Colbert is going to really produce mercantilism in France, and really puts that high standard of quality in all the goods. Well, of course, you can't talk about Louis XIV without talking about Versailles, or what's called a propaganda palace. It's a place for fun, favors, and rewards. Every night's a party, and you do things to get in good favor with the king. If that means that you are going to have a menial job, like dressing the king, or watching the king eat, or whatever, okay, that's the thing. You get rewarded for the more attention you give to the king, and the closer you are to the king, the more you get. Okay, this propaganda palace is going to be used immensely by Louis XIV. Okay, if even though all nobles were forced to live there for a part of the year, Many nobles never wanted to leave there because the minute you left, somebody's going to take your place. Okay, so you wanted that power. You wanted to be as close to the king as possible because the closer you are, the richer you are and more powerful you are. Louis XIV, after due to some religious issues that he was having in his country, will decide that the Edict of Nantes is going to need to be revoked. Okay, which would mean that there's only going to be one official religion in France. No other religion can practice. This is part of his one king, one law, one faith approach. And he basically says everyone's going to convert or leave, basically, or die, I guess you could say. Okay, and unfortunately for France, 200,000 people are going to leave to go to Prussia and other areas. And what that's going to hurt the economy, and because a lot of the people that left are your skilled laborers, people that worked with their hands. Okay, so a lot of people are going to leave because of that. Now, that's probably one of his biggest mistakes. But understand, Louis XIV had lots of mistakes. Okay, the Edict of Nantes, or revoking of the Edict of Nantes, was probably his biggest mistake. But he had a lot of other mistakes, such as he loved war too much. Okay, he was constantly at war in all the decades that he ruled. Okay, but and it was never paid for. These wars were never paid for. So it was just more debt that he was incurring. Okay, he reigned for over 60 years. Another failure of Louis. He was too tired, too old. He didn't understand the new techniques in fighting and such. He was just old and decrepit by the time he died, and it did not really allow for any true leader to replace him because his son dies before him, his grandson dies, and it's his great grandson that comes to power. But he's just a young kid, and he never is able to be really trained to be king. Also, you could talk about the expenditures on Versailles, the out of touch that Versailles was. Okay, so he never understood what was happening in his country because he was pretty much always at Versailles. Okay, so I mentioned before about wars. There's lots of wars under Louis XIV. The two biggest wars that you really need to understand is the wars. Really, the main war that you need to know is the War of Spanish Succession. Okay, the other wars I wouldn't worry so much about, but because he always tried to kind of expand the borders of France. They're not as important though, to be honest with you. War of Spanish Succession is okay. There needed to be a king in Spain. The last surviving Habsburg king died. Okay, and there was two people that were in line to the throne of Spain. Okay, Louis's grandson, and then the HRE at the time. Okay, well, what's going to happen is you're going to have a war because no one wanted a Bourbon on the Spanish throne because they thought, okay, if a Bourbon's in France and a Bourbon is in Spain, they could combine the two thrones and two empires and make one massive empire that no one would ever be able to defeat. So what's going to happen is pretty much in this war, you're going to have France versus all other major countries of Europe. And it was actually a fair fight. France put up a good fight, but in the long run, they kind of have I don't want to say it's a defeat for anybody, but it's more of a truce, I guess you could say. You're going to have the Treaty of Utrecht that's going to be signed. And it basically says that the Bourbons can have the throne of Spain, that's fine, but the Pyrenees can never disappear. Spain must always be independent, and France must always be independent. They can never combine into one empire under the Bourbons. It also basically took a large amount of power away from Spain. Okay, it took Gibraltar away from Spain. Gibraltar was the area that controlled trade in the Mediterranean. Okay, it took many colonies of Spain away. It took Asiento, Asiento. Asiento is a Spanish slave trade for the Americas. It took that away from Spain. So basically, because the idea was that no one really trusted Louis XIV, So if Louis XIV actually ended up taking over the throne of Spain or combining the two, Spain would be so weak that it wouldn't matter as much. Okay. But they weakened Spain so much that, which is why Spain is kind of what it is today. It's not a major power in Europe at all. Okay. But with Louis XIV, you have to understand these wars. You have to understand Versailles. You have to understand the cultural and governmental changes that he instituted. That's all important for Louis, the man, the myth, the legend, the poster child for absolutism. As we move to other countries in Western and Central Europe, we of course have to talk about Prussia. Prussia is one of the most important absolutist and militaristic states in Europe during this time period. Now, it doesn't become popular or doesn't become powerful until after the 30 Years' War. This area has always been around, but because of the 30 Years' War, the HRE gave this land, which was decimated by all the fighting. The government was destroyed, the ruling families were eliminated, but the HRE gave this land to the Hohenzollern family as a reward of basically thank you for helping in the 30 Years' War. So, um, and the Hohenzollern family are going to rule this land from after the 30 Years' War in 1648 all the way through to the unification of Germany, and then they ruled Germany for the first part until World War I. Now, as we know, the Hohenzollern family, they are militaristic. Okay, they are extremely militaristic, and there are four members of the Hohenzollern family that you need to know: Frederick William, the Great Elector; Frederick I; Frederick William I; and Frederick II, or Frederick the Great. Really, the only two of great importance, okay, are going to be Frederick William I and Frederick II, or Frederick the Great. Okay, but the others are, are somewhat important. The first Hohenzollern ruler is Frederick William, the Great Elector. He's the one that's given this land by the HRE and said, hey, you can rule this land. Well, he's going to work with the Junkers to rule, because basically the Hohenzollerns come into this land, and they're like, they were they were basically given this land. So the other families that lived on this land, the other important families are like, whoa, 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 what's up with that? So to appease them, okay, these Junkers, to appease the Junkers, which are the ruling or the noble families of the Germanic states, Frederick William the Great Elector basically says, okay, if you let me rule, I'm going to build up the economy, I'm going to build up the military, I'm going to build our power up, but I'll let you control the serfs on your land. And as long as you stay loyal with me, we're all good. And that's exactly what's going to happen. You have to understand the Hohenzollerns are going to, during their reign, they're going to add large amounts of land to this area. They're going to obtain land that contains natural resources. They're going to increase the urban populations. Right now, this area was decimated, and there's really no natural resources. So their goal is, as they add more land, they're going to add more resources. Okay. Now, Prussia is going to be a military with a state. It is extremely, extremely militaristic. Every male will eventually be serving in the military for at least part of their life, and for certain kind of men, their entire life will be surrounded by the military. In Prussia, you're going to have a tolerated um, class, basically. They will tolerate all religions, all groups of people. Okay, when Louis XIV, for example, revokes the Edict of Nantes, okay, Prussia is like, hey, come over to us. We'll accept you, because the people that were leaving France were the highly skilled laborers, and then of course this would help. So this would help the Prussians out. So they were more than welcome to accept the Huguenots. They were more than welcome to accept the Lutherans. Even the Catholics, they accepted. They didn't care, as long as they brought some kind of good resources for the economy. They accepted. Another ruler of the Hohenzollerns that you need to know is Frederick William I, or also called the Soldier King. Under his reign, he's going to basically make Prussia a militaristic state. Okay, this under his reign, it's going to be um, what Sparta of the North, I believe was their title, because everything was so militaristic. Now it was militaristic under Frederick William the Great Elector. It was militaristic under Frederick William the First. But now under Frederick William the First, it's going to be an uber militaristic state. The reason that Germany has always been militaristic can date back to Frederick William the First. Okay, so we've talked about three of the four major Hohenzollern family members during this time period. The fourth one, of course, being Frederick the Great, the son of Frederick William the First, the Soldier King. He is going to continue his father's legacy of creating a very militaristic state, but he also incorporates the Enlightened ideas in the 1700s. We will talk more about him in the fourth unit, or next week's um, lesson. But when we look at history, one of the most powerful families ever in history has to be the Habsburgs. And if you see on this map, everything in yellow and red was controlled by the Habsburgs. Okay, this just makes this family extremely powerful. Now, the Habsburgs are considered an absolute rule because they're going to rule Austria with an iron fist, and they will rule Austria, the Austrian lands that you see in the dark yellow, solid yellow, um, all the way through to World War One. Okay, and for the most part, they will be an absolute ruling family. Okay, so the Habsburgs are going to rule from the 1400s all the way through 1917, which is near the end of World War One. They're going to rule, as you saw on the map, about 2/3 of all of Europe. Okay, either directly or indirectly. They're going to control Spain. They're going to control Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, parts of Italy, the HRE, the lowland countries, you name it. Now, they were powerful for the most part throughout most of their reign, and they are considered one of the most powerful families in history. The problem is with the 30 Years' War, when they lost the 30 Years' War, because all the fighting was on their land within the borders of the HRE, they're going to be decimated politically, economically, and socially. So they're going to lose some power. Now, what's also going to help them lose power is the War of Spanish Succession, which we had talked about earlier, where the last Spanish Habsburg king dies, and there's a whole war of who's going to succeed, and the Bourbons won of France. Okay, so they're going to lose some land, they're going to lose some power, but they're still a very powerful family because let's be honest, they control all of Central Europe. Now, the HRE at the time, Charles VI, he's the HRE between the first half of the 1700s. Unfortunately for him, he has no male heirs. He only has one daughter. And during this time period within the HRE, none of the kings, none of the monarchies could actually be female. They weren't allowed to rule. But since he had no male heirs, he was afraid that the Habsburg land will be divided up, and he didn't want that to happen. So since now it's going to look like he's not going to have any more children, he decided to make an agreement with the major rulers within the HRE. Remember HRE is made up of like 300 kingdoms. So Charles VI is going to make what's called a pragmatic sanction. That pragmatic sanction was an agreement between these other rulers within the HRE and him, that when he dies, they're going to allow his daughter Maria Theresa to rule the Habsburg land, which would be Austria, Hungary, all that area, rule it directly. Okay, and the land can never be split up. They have to let her rule, give her peace, etc. The thing is that she will not be the HRE. There'll be another Habsburg that will be given the HRE title. And everyone was okay with that. Everyone signed it because in return, if they agreed to this, Charles VI would give them money and land and other favors while he's alive. Well, in 1740, two important people died. Frederick William I, the Soldier King of Prussia, and Charles VI. They both died in the same year. Um, in Prussia, Frederick the Great comes to power, and in Austria, Maria Theresa comes to power. Well, Frederick the Great's like, wait a second, this is going to be easy pickings. We need some extra resources
because really Prussia had very few natural resources. The Habsburg land is very fertile, so why don't we try to take over the Habsburg land since there's a woman ruler? So what's going to happen is you're going to have the War of Austrian Succession. In this War of Austrian Succession, Frederick the Great challenges Maria Theresa, and it's really a war within the HRE. Frederick the Great's goal was to take all of the land that Maria Theresa had. By the end of this war, you're going to have Frederick the Great winning, but he only is able to obtain the area of Silesia. Okay, the Silesia was rich in natural resources, but it's only a part of the empire. She is still able to keep the rest of the empire. Now, there's a lot of bad blood between Frederick the Great and Maria Theresa, and that tension between Austria and Prussia will last for many, many years. Okay, not just between these two rulers, but all the way through German unification.
Now that we looked at absolutism in Western and Central Europe, okay, now let's look at absolutism in Eastern Europe. And of course, we're talking about Russia. Russia has been around for, hundreds of years. It was until the mid 1500s, it was called Muscovy because it was a lot smaller than the more modern borders. But from the early 1600s onward to 1917, the Romanov family are going to go ahead and rule over Russia. Now, really in Russia, there is no influence from the Renaissance. There's no influence from the Roman Catholic Church. Everything that's happening in Western Europe is really not affecting Russia. Russia, for the most part, is fairly isolated. Between the time of troubles, which is where there's a lot of chaos, and you had Ivan the Terrible and all that happening, you don't have to worry about that for Euro. For Euro, you need to focus starting with Peter the Great. And Peter the Great comes to power in the 1600s. And, besides Peter the Great, prior to that, you have to understand, prior to Peter, Russia was very backwards. It was almost like still in the Middle Ages. The Renaissance had not touched it. Okay, now Peter the Great understood that, and he wanted to modernize Russia. And the way he did that was by going to Western Europe, learning about the Renaissance ways of thinking, governing, the way of the new economies, society, you name it. So Peter the Great's going to really soak up all that information like a sponge and eventually bring it back to Russia, where he's going to force modernization down everyone's throat. He's going to eliminate the old Russian garb and make them look more European. He's going to build a new city called St. Petersburg so that it's considered the windows to the West. So now he could trade openly and easily with Europe. Okay, Peter the Great is going to expand the military. Okay, modernize the military, introduce new crops like the new potatoes that came from the Americas, and new agricultural ways that were found because of the agricultural revolution. He's going to, I call it skilled workers. Okay, these are people that he's going to pretty much take from Europe, encourage them to come to Russia. Okay, to bring the new ways of producing goods to Russia. These are skilled laborers. These are not just slaves. These are not just peasant workers. These are not just jobs that anybody could have. These are people that have skill, like shipbuilders and carpenters and things like that. He is going to force everyone to shave their beards. Men, women, you name it, are going to shave their beards. They have to dress like Europeans, etc. Which was not very popular because the Russian clothing at the time was thick, and it was because of the weather was so cold, so they wore heavy garments. The problem is that was not European, and he wanted everyone to look more European. Now he is going to put very strict control over the boyars, which are the nobles, Boyars,
ERS, and of course over serfdom as well. Okay, just like Louis XIV, he's going to impose strict control over the nobles, the boyars. He's going to tell them that they have to live in St. Petersburg, they have to build a house there, they have to, if they want a title, they have to serve in what's called the table of ranks, which would be basically service to the state, whether it's militaristic service or serving in the government. Basically, if you want to keep your title, if you want to keep your boyar status, you have to serve the state. You have to be a servant of the state. Now, he is going to control the Russian Orthodox Church, okay, and he kind of, that's a tightrope because he doesn't want to anger too many people, but he also wants to control the church. And last but not least, he does have many wars because he does want to expand the border. One of the biggest wars that he has was the Great Northern War with Sweden, where he was able to obtain the land that now is where St. Petersburg sits. This allows now for trade with Europe in the Baltic Sea. So, as we travel throughout Europe, looking at all the different countries that either were full-blown absolutist governments or those that experimented with absolutism, we saw that in England and France and Prussia and Russia and the Habsburg Empire. One entity in Europe that really defied the road to absolutism is going to be the Dutch Republic. Once they gained their independence, full independence after the 30 Years' War, they became a republic that was governed by the wealthy elite. They really are going to rise to greatness. It's called the Dutch Golden Age, because during this time period, you have large amounts of freedom. For example, even though the official religion is the Calvinist religion, they're going to have the most rights, but the Catholics, Protestants, and Jews are all going to have religious freedom as well as some rights as well. Okay, but the reason the Dutch are so important, remember when we say the Dutch, we're talking about the Netherlands. The reasons they're so important is because they become the center of banking, finance, trade after we start moving away from the Mediterranean. Okay, this occurs during the Age of Exploration. Once people started going westward to the Americas or around Africa, then there's going to be a more of a movement away from Italy as the center of trade to now Amsterdam and the Dutch Republic. They're going to be the center of trade. Now they will be the center of the Fuggers, for example. They will be the bankers of the North, the Fuggers, Fuggers. Okay, they're like the Medicis of the North. Okay, they're going to be the epicenters. Amsterdam and others will be the epicenters of finance. Okay, but also with supplies. They're going to be financing money, supplies, ships. At one point in the 17th century, the Dutch made about 10,000 ships to be sold to other countries. Okay, now they become extremely dominant in the 17th century and really in the 18th century. Now, and that continues on for a long time. Unfortunately, as the golden age of England was starting to occur and the French golden age was occurring under Louis XIV, you start seeing a decline in the Dutch, okay? Because England and France are starting to usurp some of the Dutch's finances, some of the Dutch's economic prowess, and they start creating their own ships and what have you. Also, the Dutch start declining because they are constantly at war, okay, with England and France over trade routes, over supplies, over anything dealing with economics. So eventually, in the 1700s, their prosperity will actually decline because of the rise of England and France. But they are the epicenter of freedoms for most of Europe during the 16th, 17th, and even early 18th centuries. So, not every country is going to become a very powerful country. When you have powerful countries, you're also going to have countries that are not powerful. And even though the road to absolutism created many countries that become extremely powerful, there are those on the other end of the spectrum that they are countries that become weaker. Okay, what I call the declining powers. Now, they all have something in common. They all had very poor leadership. Their rulers, their kings, their monarchs were basically not the right person for the right time period. They either had very poor leadership or they had monarchs who had very little power. They had weak governments. Some of their governments were extremely weak, disorganized, and did not want a central power, such as a king or a monarchy, and they really spread out the wealth into many different sectors, especially the nobility. Also, a lot of countries had a very narrow focus on economics. For example, a lot of these countries are more agricultural economies, and when you have agriculture as your major economic um, money maker, I guess you could say, in your country, that is not always good. You need to have a diverse economy with manufacturing and agriculture and trades and whatever to really stimulate the economy. One type of industry is not going to suffice. And last but not least, you had very ineffective cooperation between the monarchs and the nobles. In some countries, the nobles are wanting as much power as possible, and they're not going to want to share it. And vice versa. Sometimes you have a king who's trying to have a lot more power and does not get the help of the nobles. So you're going to have a very constant war between the nobles and the monarchs. Some of the countries I've listed here are all considered declining powers during the 1700s, 16 and 1700s. The HRE, well, we know because of the 30 Years' War and the War of Austrian Succession, is going to be a very divided um, area. Even though after the 30 Years' War, the HRE is still around, the HRE itself, the emperor, has very little power. And after the 30 Years' War, the power is even less. Okay, the 300 kingdoms that make up the HRE, each king is all about themselves, gaining power for themselves, and the only thing that might bond some kingdoms together is their religion. If they're Roman Catholic, they would be aligned with the HRE. If they're not Roman Catholic, they're all about doing things on their own. Okay, the HRE really had no army, no resources or authority. So if there was a war that was going to happen within the HRE, the actual emperor has to ask the different kingdoms, the different kings within the HRE to supply troops. That's not a way to run an empire if you don't even have your own troops. Poland is another entity that, even though it's what considered the largest landed country in Europe, they have no central government because their king has no power, and they have what's called a Liberum Veto, Liberum veto, VETO. Okay, what that means, if the king wants to make a law, 100% of the nobles within the government have to agree to it. Okay, think about this. One person could break the veto. Okay, one person wants to deny the king power. That's all it takes. This is why Poland will cease to exist by the end of the 1700s. The Ottoman Empire is complicated and really an ineffective empire because of the way it's ruling in the line of succession. Okay, just like the HRE, the Ottoman Empire is comprised of many different kingdoms, each kingdom controlled by a sultan or a king, and basically they do their own thing. There's no real centralized government. It's fragmented. It's they have strong local leaders, but not really strong federal leaders, and that's going to help lead to their demise. Spain. Oh, by the way, also with the Ottoman Empire, they really don't take up the Renaissance until much later, just like Russia did. Spain, we talked about Spain earlier on with the War of Spanish Succession, and really from that point onward, or actually even before the War of Spanish Succession, they had a series of wars over religion, the expulsion of the Jews, the Muslims, the Dutch-Spanish wars, and then the War of Spanish Succession really left Spain decimated, and all their important areas were taken away during the War of Spanish Succession, and that massive amount of debt, virtually no manufacturing or exports, limited resources. Really, their main resource during this time period was cork, C-O-R-K, the cork that you put in a wine bottle. That was basically it. Maybe olives, but it was very limited. Other areas that had issues, Sweden. After Gustavus Adolphus dies in the 30 Years' War, Sweden has very few major or powerful leaders. Um, after the 30 Years' War, then you have the loss of the Great Northern War against Russia, and Sweden goes even further. Again, because of a lack of a good leader. They also had a weak economy. They had very little when it came to manufacturing, and that's going to really hurt them. We talked about the Netherlands or Holland, especially after London replaces Amsterdam as the epicenter of trade during the English Golden Age of Elizabeth. Okay, the British Navy is also going to becomes far superior than the Netherlands was. Okay, overall, we talked about many different countries in the age of absolutism, even though not all countries were absolutists. Hopefully you understand that, whether it's an absolute government, a republic, or something other, there's a variety of different ways to rule in Europe. This is your Unit 3, and this is the age of absolutism.